Sewer Utility District Commission meeting.
Just start doing video games.
Call it to order and do the roll call, please.
Commissioner Strelchek is excused. Commissioner Talaco. Commissioner Meyer. Commissioner Hancher.
Here.
Commissioner Bach.
Here.
Commissioner Parrish.
Here.
Commissioner Bratt is excused. Commissioner Gebhardt. And Commissioner Nervin.
Here. First up is approval of the meeting minutes from our last meeting, which the date is not in the agenda. I'll look real quickly.
So moved. Second.
The minutes from 8:12. Motion and a second. Any comments, corrections? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. On to ordinances. Ordinance 2025-1684, an ordinance appropriating the necessary funds from the City of Mequon Sewer Utility District for the year 2026 for capital charge payments to the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District and City of Mequon capital debt service requirements.
Sorry, I'm getting a little feedback. I'm trying to.
Yeah, it's a little echoey, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll deal with it for a minute, and someone better capable than I will go through. As a reminder, the sewer levy is frozen in terms of an amount per the policy, and so the ordinance is the levy requesting approval.
Hold on, the great and powerful Oz is fixing the microphones. Does anyone have any questions? I think this microphone is okay. You may recall we've capped the levy because of its impact on the rest of the city's ability to levy as a whole. So the rate changes, but the dollar amount is flat. So there's not a whole lot to discuss, unless we want to change our policy we decided on last year. Looks like some supplemental info is about to be displayed.
Only if needed. We're happy to go through, and the finance department can correct me on anything I speak to that is incorrect, but the history of the annual debt service was available. It is trending in the maybe good direction, as we hope, with the debt decreasing as we move towards payoff. And so this is the levy comparison for the 2025 fiscal year versus the 2026 fiscal year. Which again shows that the amount has been frozen. It does just shift a portion of the funding because MMSD is transitioning its costs from more capital heavy to O&M heavy. And so we balance that out with the City of Mequon's portion to keep that levy frozen.
Any questions from the commission? Or a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion and a second. Any additional discussion required? Hearing and seeing none, please call the roll.
Commissioner Talaco. Aye. Commissioner Meyer.
Aye.
Commissioner Hancher.
Aye.
Commissioner Bach.
Aye.
Commissioner Parrish.
Aye.
Commissioner Gebhardt.
Aye.
Commissioner Nervin.
Aye. On to resolutions. Resolution 4238, a resolution adopting the fiscal year 2026 sanitary sewer utility budget and establishing the 2026 sanitary sewer user fee schedule.
So unlike the water budget, we do contemplate both the budget, which is in your packet, and the user rates. You all may recall that there are two forms of user rates, the flat rate and the volumetric rate. Consistent with the policy, the rates are proposed to increase until we can meet the debt financing, the debt service ratio. And so it is consistent at that 5.5% increase that was otherwise proposed, increasing to $95 for the flat and $8 and 0.811 cents for the volumetric rate. The budget provides not only the O&M costs, but also cap. At this point, unlike what we've seen in years past, we are not projecting sufficient unassigned funds that we are requesting for any allocation. So we will keep that as the policy otherwise requires for us. And so we are here tonight requesting the approval of both the budget and the rates to pass through effective January 1st of 2026. We obviously have some large capital projects on the horizon. Most of you are aware the Lift Station E project will be bid at this point likely in first quarter of next year. And that is a sizable project that, thanks to our transition in the policy and funding, we will be able to self-fund and not be required to borrow for that project. We have a number of other capital projects as well, but that is certainly the most impactful, both financially and to the system, to continue to alleviate surcharging on the east side of the city.
Fantastic. Thanks for that overview. And certainly good news that we'll be able to self-fund it. Any questions from the commission on this item? Or a motion?
Motion to approve. Second.
Motion and a second. Any last comments? This is your only chance. Okay. Hearing and seeing none, let's call the roll.
Commissioner Tlaco? Aye. Commissioner Meyer?
Aye.
Commissioner Hancher?
Aye.
Commissioner Bach?
Aye.
Commissioner Parrish?
Aye.
Commissioner Gebhardt?
Aye.
Commissioner Nervin?
Aye. We have a sewer budget. Amazing. We have just one discussion item, a discussion concerning public sewer lateral reimbursement policy.
We're really before you just to try to take the temperature of the commission and ensure before we generate any sort of policy language to present at a future meeting that we have consensus that we should consider a cost share policy. For those that are not aware, sewer laterals, which is the pipe that goes from the main line to the home, are divided in the city of Mequon, unlike most municipalities, where the ownership for the public portion of the lateral is that which is located within the right-of-way, as opposed to the private side where it transitions at the property line and then is the homeowner's responsibility from that point until the home. We have seen not a large number, but an increasing number of sanitary sewer lateral projects that you may not be surprised don't magically stop at the property line. And so they require work both on the public side and on the private side. Historically, we've looked at a number of different options concerning cost shares. Sometimes it is literally divided at the property line and we just have the residents take care of their portion, and then we add it to our capital list to address once we get a volume to reach some cost efficiencies. But we've seen some not only where it would be a benefit to the system as a whole for it to be treated as one pipe as it is, but also just some logistical issues where the separation of costs can't be defined by the property line. So we're looking for the commission's feedback on its willingness to consider a public lateral reimbursement policy where if there is a defined scope of work and potentially a threshold of a dollar amount, if the commission so desires, that we would be able to set forth some policy language that would define how reimbursement would be addressed for the public portion of the lateral. We have a number of considerations in there. Obviously, we would want to be able to define what types of projects are eligible, what types of properties are eligible, what reimbursement costs would be considered, whether or not there would be caps on those costs, and any restrictions that we have on funding or or process and policies. But at this point, we wanted to bring forth, mostly at the request of MMSD, they have a pipe check program that they offer to residents that really only covers the private portion of the lateral, and they were looking for a companion piece from the city for the public portion, but it really shouldn't matter whether people are participating in, well, from our perspective, it shouldn't really matter whether people are participating in the pipe check program or not. The portion in the right of way is the city's or the sewer utility's ultimate responsibility to fund. And so we're looking to seek some feedback on having a policy that would allow for reimbursement when the city may not be the contract holder for the project to be completed.
So this would allow residents to get the whole thing done at once,
Yes.
instead of having to do their portion and us having to come back months, years later.
Yeah, more often years, but yes.
Seems like something that would be a benefit to our customers and maybe even us if we don't have to manage those.
Yes, there is certainly, again, we would typically, and part of the reason it takes years is we would typically wait until there are a number of laterals to reach a cost efficiency of issuing either a contract or a bid for lateral work. And depending on where they are located, that may not be cost efficient anyway. If there are multiple mobilizations for the contractor, each individual one just becomes more expensive to address. We would typically see two different types. One is certainly an emergency where we may not be consulted ahead of time, that it's just something that has to be done in the moment, whether that may be root intrusion that has resulted in a sewer backup or whether that may be damage. But we would, if the commission agrees, we would try to set some policy language that would set the parameters under which reimbursement would be considered, so that we don't have either a large financial obligation hanging out there, and so that we can have some metrics and control over the standards of what would be completed on the public portion of the lateral.
Okay, thank you. Any other feedback from the commission? Generally, I think this is appropriate for a straw poll here. Who thinks this is generally a good idea and should proceed? And obviously the guidelines will be written as we go, but if we don't think it's a good idea, then don't devote staff time to doing the guidelines. So show of hands, who thinks this should go forward and have some parameters written around it? Okay. I think you've got your direction.
I do.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for that. That brings us to the end of the sewer meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn? Motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Glad there's no one opposed. We will now move on to the Mequon Municipal Water Utility Commission. And we can let the record reflect that the same people here for the last meeting are still here. Only 14 minutes have transpired. That brings us up to meeting approval minutes. We have the meeting minutes also from August 12th for our consideration. Is there a motion on the minutes?
Move approval.
Motion and a second. Any comments, corrections, etc.? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The minutes are approved. And we'll get on to a long list of discussion and possible action items. The first is a status update on the Mequon Water Master Plan. Jim's got this one?
Sure. So we did a review as the Water Commission had asked us to bring back to the commission, where we're at in relation to the master plan. We had wanted to wait until we, had all the data from the annual report to the PSC. So in doing our review, you can see that several different things. There were like 5 different charts that we wanted to bring to your attention. They tend to be the most impactful charts from the master plan. one on the financials is the rate of return. Do you have the? There we go. So the red dashed line on the chart that you can see is the PSC's target rate of return, which always used to be 5% rate of return, but in 2022 they changed that to 6.5%. But what the Mequon utility has actually achieved, you can see in the blue line above. And since ownership of the utility has always overperformed the PSC's rate of return. So that's a good thing. The utility is healthy financially and continues to be. We also had a table that showed a comparison to the surrounding communities as far as water rates are concerned. Mequon, when I first started, was the very highest water rate in the area. That little blue line that you see there was actually at the very bottom, which represents the highest rate. But over time, what's happened is the infrastructure from the Mequon water utility is new infrastructure because the utility started in 1998. And we consolidated some utilities, but even those subdivisions that we consolidated were from the 80s, from the 1980s, 1990s. So their infrastructure was relatively new, but all of the infrastructure that we've installed has all been, since inception of the utility, since 1998. So our rates will maintain relatively flat over time, whereas surrounding communities that are more mature utilities, their infrastructure tends to be from the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. So it's older infrastructure that is at the end of its life cycle. So surrounding utilities will have to make investments in their buried utility plant where the Mequon water utility will not. So you will see over time, our rate will actually work its way up that chart. In other words, become more affordable as compared to the surrounding utilities because they will continue to have to make investments in their utility plant. Then there were two other charts. One went over the customer accounts by class. As the utility has grown, our percentage of residential versus commercial versus public utility has maintained relatively the same. Also, that is true of our RU basis. As we add customers, we seem to be adding at a similar rate. And I think that kind of covers the majority of the charts. If you had any questions, I'd be very happy to answer.
Commissioner Parrish.
Thank you. Welcome back, Mr. Voigt, and I can't remember your colleague's name.
Eric Fulsis.
Eric, welcome back. Very helpful charts and good report. My two questions were, you made a note that we're doing a good job covering the non-billable water, or that was, we did like a drone survey and we found a bunch of new connections. I just didn't quite understand. I was surprised we actually found anything because did we follow up? Was there any action as far as like residual water that they've been taking all this time? Or is it they just got free water up till now and then we bill them moving forward? That was one of my questions. And then my other question is, for the rate of return calculation, what's the, or return on investment, what's the denominator? Is it just the total value of all the infrastructure that we've ever installed? Or I'm not quite understanding this rate of return measure.
Sure. Eric, you want to grab that one?
Yeah, I'll chime in since I'm more versed on the PSC calculation there. So to touch on the first part, which is the non-revenue water, we did do that satellite survey, found a number of underground leaks that were going on. Those leaks that were underground were not going through any customer meters. So we dug those up, repaired those. There's no like back billing possible for that. That's just a leak on our side on the public infrastructure that we repaired. And we're still, repairing some this year that weren't on the leak survey, but as we find leaking valves, leaking hydrants, we continue to replace those. Other items, our field staff, myself and Jim, we've been kind of like deep diving into our billing system, trying to compare some mapping using Jim's institutional knowledge of, I remember these guys, connected, but we don't have a meter there. So a big one that we found was actually one of the dormitories at Concordia had the meter installed and we were never reading that radio. So it's been added to the billing system. In cases like that, there's not really any back billing, but it's kind of, we start from today and go forward. So we won't really see that impact on the rate of return or not rate of return, non-revenue water, until we get, quarters and quarters of billing to see where that factors in. But there's been a number of those that we've found, and continue to find. Part of that is just, the first 10 years of the utility were We Energies. We don't have access to all their records. Also with a voluntary utility, we know there are gaps. People are not forced to connect. So when we have a main installed on the street, if people opt in at that time, we usually have very good records on the initial connection. But if someone decides to, call a plumber and connect and they never pull a permit, it's tough for us to know if they ever connect. So we're trying to work with inspections, do all the due diligence we can on that. In regards to the PSC rate of return, it's all based on the PSC accounting method. So it's a little different than the municipal accounting budget. For example, on PSC, they don't consider your debt service or your interest as like an operation and maintenance expense. So their numerator and denominator, the top is your revenues and your expenses, what they consider O&M expenses. So that's everything that's not capital based. That does include depreciation, even though it's a non-cash expense. And then the denominator is actually the net plant value. So it's the total plant value minus the accumulated depreciation. So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if we've installed $30 million worth of infrastructure in the ground that the utility paid for, and it's only depreciated $5 million, that denominator is $25 million, 30 million minus 5 million. So as we, that denominator is going to continue to grow. As we expand, we're adding more money into the ground, but we're also depreciating more every year. So, it kind of depends on our growth if that denominator is going up or down in any given year. Yep.
Also wanted to point out this chart here, it drives at that non-revenue water, where you can see even though our customer counts have gone up from 2017 through 2025, the utility continues to grow, but the total purchased water has been dropping off the last 2 years because of finding that non-revenue water. We've been able to reduce our purchased water even though customer counts are continuing to rise.
Commissioner Bach.
I'm not sure this is a master plan question, but I'm just curious on, can't remember what community it was, maybe Elkhorn or Lake Geneva that had that water issue recently. A couple months ago through testing, they had to cart in all kinds of water, but they had some kind of major problem. I'm just curious on how the testing works so that wouldn't happen in the Mequon water utility, but it was on the news for like a week. Can't remember what municipality it was, but they had to shut down their water supply and cart things in, and I was just curious on how monitoring of the Mequon water utility works.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. So the monitoring, our water quality monitoring happens in several different ways. One is the suppliers, they test their water on an ongoing basis as they, treat it, because they're both treated Lake Michigan, water treatment plants. So Milwaukee Water Works and North Shore Water Commission treat, hundreds of parameters, either on a hourly, daily, weekly, monthly. They're constantly testing for all these different, contaminants and making sure that everything meets, safe drinking water standards, so that we know that leaving the plant, it's good. And then in our system, we do our own testing for, several different things: lead and copper, BACT, whatever the DNR requires us based off of our population, do testing in the distribution system to see how that's going. The bigger question you ask is, what do we do if something goes wrong? That's an excellent question. And we are uniquely set up such that we're very, very resilient to that. Why I say that is we have 2 surface water plants that we buy water from. We buy water from Milwaukee Water Works, and we also buy water from North Shore Water Commission. It takes 4 days from the water to leave Milwaukee Water Works before it gets to the first meter pit at County Line Road and 76th Street. So if something like crypto were to happen again, we would be aware of that happening as it's transferring and working its way north towards Mequon, and we could literally turn the valve and shut the water off and supply water from North Shore Water Commission to provide water to our customers that did not have that within the water supply, just to use that as an example. So it's nice having the two different treatment plants, because if something goes wrong with one supplier, we have the full ability to feed the entire utility from the other treatment plant, which is very nice. And they are similar treatment plants in the fact that they are, gravity sanding charcoal filters, but their final brush, one uses ozone and the other one uses ultraviolet light to do the final scrub for, the viruses and bacteria. So depending on, which one is more effective, if for some reason we need to shut off one supply and turn on the other, we have that ability.
And earlier you had mentioned these other utilities that are a little older, and we've seen it in the news, rate hikes to address aging infrastructure. When do we need to be concerned? It's probably decades down the road, or are we in a better position because our materials are newer and they're not, cast iron mains and all sorts of old things that get brittle and break? Or is it inherently more resilient? I don't know how long
70
buried
years.
plastic is supposed to last, but I'm guessing it
70 years.
lasts a long, long time.
Yeah. The PSC's depreciation or life cycle on water main is between 70 to 100 years, but PVC pipe hasn't been in the ground for 70 to 100 years, so we still don't know, what its ultimate failure, mode of failure will be, how long will this last, and I don't think we truly have an answer on that yet.
Okay. Just figured I'd ask.
The one I was talking about was nitrite. That was the one in Williams Bay. That was
Okay, oh, sure,
yeah. So
okay.
they had to shut everything down, close all the restaurants. That was right over Labor Day.
Wow, yeah, okay. Yeah.
Any other questions on the update on the master plan? Okay, we're just receiving info. I don't think we need a vote on this one. But we can, if everyone's good, we can move on to our second item, request to reassign $400,000 in undesignated cash reserves to one-time capital projects.
As noted, at this point, the reserves do exceed our policy, and so we are requesting the reallocation of those funds to the capital budget. The dollar amount that we are requesting officially is
400,000.
400,000. So we are still, the finance department wants us to note that obviously we are using projected values, not audit values. And so we're adding a level of safety beyond what the policy requires and only requesting the redesignation of $400,000.
And no matter how the numbers shake out, we'll make sure it is in concert with our policy.
Correct. Obviously, if the audit comes and it's less, we have a large factor of safety there, but if it is less, then we would not take more than what the policy would allow.
All right. Any questions from any of the commissioners?
Motion to approve?
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Not, please call the roll.
Commissioner Telacco. Commissioner Meyer. Commissioner Hancher. Commissioner Bach.
Aye.
Commissioner Parrish. Commissioner Gebhardt.
Aye.
Commissioner Nerman.
Aye. On to our next one, the adoption of fiscal year 2026 Mequon water utility budget.
As a, oh, yes, no.
Oh, we have a motion.
Second.
In a second, we can still have a little debate and staff intro.
All I was going to share is, unlike the sewer utility, the water utility budget exercise is just math. There is no rate setting as a part of the budget, so it's simply taking the revenues and allocating them across the expense accounts.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any additional questions? Hearing and seeing none, let's call the roll.
Commissioner Telacco. Commissioner Meyer.
Aye.
Commissioner Hancher. Commissioner Bach.
Aye.
Commissioner Parrish.
Aye.
Commissioner Gebhardt.
Aye.
Commissioner Nervin.
Aye. Next up, authorization for the Mequon Water Utility to exceed $25,000 for purchases and/or services to complete projects as needed during fiscal year 2026 from the following contractors: Core and Main, Aetna Supply, Granau, DF Tomasini, Mid-City, MJ Construction, Rosga, Budiak Plumbing, Badger Meter, and United Systems and Software.
All of these funds are already accounted for in the budget. These are just the contractors that we may or may not go over $25,000 throughout the course of the year, just due to emergencies or work that is necessary, but already allocated for within the budget.
Correct, and they usually end up being emergencies when we need to pull on them, so. A motion and a support of this will ensure we don't have any emergency meetings for this topic throughout the fiscal year 2026. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion and a second. Any last questions? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Commissioner Talaco. Commissioner Meyer. Commissioner Hancher. Commissioner Bach.
Aye.
Commissioner Parrish.
Aye.
Commissioner Gebhardt.
Aye.
Commissioner Nervin.
Aye. On to authorization to purchase 410 water meters and associated appurtenances in the amount not to exceed of $125,000.
This is a standard item per our meter purchasing policy that you see every year, and this year's is for not to exceed 125,000.
Move to approve.
Motion and a second. Any questions? A few more than last year, but we're keeping up with the meter replacement. Any other questions or discussion? Hearing and seeing none, please call the roll.
Commissioner Talaco. Commissioner Meyer. Commissioner Hancher.
Aye.
Commissioner Bach.
Aye.
Commissioner Parrish.
Aye.
Commissioner Gebhardt.
Aye.
Commissioner Nervin.
Aye. On to item F, status update on negotiations to amend the City of Mequon's water supply contract with the City of Milwaukee Water Works. Mr. City Attorney.
Unless Kristen wants to. I tried. Just a brief update this evening in terms of the status of the Milwaukee Water Works renegotiation. As you'll recall, last year, we kind of did an analysis of the agreement, identified a couple issues with the agreement that we identified needed to be amended, both for good policy reasons, and then also because there were some potential limitations on ultimate development within the community or within the city. After that, we prepared a revised version of the contract, which corrected the issues that were there. I shared that with my counterpart in the Milwaukee City Attorney's Office, and after they reviewed that, they eventually came back with a request that we submit a formal request to negotiate with the city with respect to that contract. So we did that on July 15th. After a little bit of time, that was met with a response that they wanted us to essentially do the calculation that we were supposed to do on an annual basis as it relates to new customers within the service area. And we put together that. Staff and I had a discussion about that number, and ultimately just decided that we would just turn over the number as we calculated it, which puts us at about 24% in terms of new connections. The contract, as you'll recall, limited us to 20%, and so we are over that. Staff and I do believe that depending on how you do the calculation, and again, remember that the agreement is not clear, which was one of the issues that we had with it, that number may or not be the correct number, but we decided for these purposes that was the number that we were going to provide them, and we provided that to them, and then we received a response back that they were then going to commence the process for negotiation. That process is spelled out by a resolution that the City Council has adopted in Milwaukee, and that basically begins with the introduction of a resolution with the Common Council and the on approval, that then kind of kicks off the process. That initial resolution will identify specifically who the negotiating team will be, typically somebody from the mayor's office, somebody from the Legislative Reference Bureau, and somebody from the water utility, somebody from the Department of Community Development, are all part of that negotiating committee, and then they will move forward. We had been told that resolution was potentially going to be introduced as early as the end of October. It does not look like that took place. Looking at the agendas of the Common Council down there, looking at it, it all kind of flows through the Board of Public Works there. Looking at the agenda for the Board of Public Works, I suspect it was just because they were swamped last month. They had a very large agenda. And so my guess is we'll be on this month. I do have a call into the superintendent down there just to confirm where we're at. But we anticipate probably this month that resolution will get kicked off, which will be the beginning of the negotiations. I think quite honestly, the biggest kind of hurdle that we're going to face is that the resolution that I talked about before does provide that they look for what they call the Cleveland Agreement, which is based off of an agreement that the Cleveland Water Utility uses for the surrounding communities there. And basically, it's a separate agreement, not within the water contract itself, but with the municipality that basically looks to try to recoup some of the economic development loss that they've identified by doing this. I'm not particularly concerned about that one in this case, recognizing number one, we're already a customer. We're doing things within the community is the first point, and then the second point is that as I look at some of the other things that this Cleveland agreement, if you will, has done in other places, it's kind of all over the board. Waukesha Water, for example, their commitment or their agreement was really the adding of the infrastructure that was necessary within Milwaukee that, yes, admittedly, ultimately served Waukesha as well, but also upgraded their system as part of that. New Berlin's agreement is basically just if you hit a certain level of flow, that point is going to kick in some additional payments that need to be made. So it's fairly, I don't want to say non-consequential, because obviously anytime you're giving up money under the idea that we're, even though we should be cooperative in the region, that there's something there, they don't seem to be using it as a large hammer at this point, I guess is the best way to describe it. So.
And we don't even know what they're proposing yet.
Correct.
So if it's a bad deal, we're not going to take a bad deal. Commissioner Parrish.
Hey, good progress, Attorney Sajak. I still want to lament a little bit. I still think it's kind of disturbing. They made us do the calculation and disclose kind of where we are exactly in that realm. And now they know that we're above the 20% threshold. And so in my mind, until we get a new contract, every new subdivision, like in the central growth, the Southwest Industrial Corridor, that's all up in the air. And to invoke some kind of economic development loss clause would be purely absurd. It's like no one's trying to get into the city of Milwaukee. Everyone's trying to get out as far as businesses go. So I don't know how you would possibly calculate that economic loss. People are leaving for many other reasons, and us taking their waters or purchasing more water isn't going to lead to economic loss. So I don't know. I hope you shut it down hard, and if anything, I don't see why we can't just get rid of the 20% threshold and just keep on growing. Their water is unlimited, so I don't appreciate that leverage point they're trying to bring over our water utility and our customers. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we just heard the attorney say they're not being particularly hard-nosed about it, but
I
we
heard.
have to see what they come forward with. And if it is ridiculous, it'll go right back pretty quickly. But we got to see what they offer. The ball is in their court now. We're waiting to receive. So more to follow.
Correct.
It's just a status update, so.
And notwithstanding the fact that it is in their court, we'll continue to be on them to make sure that it's, not forgotten. Because obviously there's decisions that the council is looking to make long-term that are going to depend on how that agreement turns out. So we'll make sure to continue to keep our finger on them.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, we've been updated. On to discussion item regarding an amendment to the City of Mequon Municipal Water Utilities Water Connection Policy related to the cost sharing for betterment of service projects.
Nope, we missed one before that.
Oh, one up from that? I put my marker in the wrong spot, I apologize.
That's,
So not that one. Consideration of an amendment to the Mequon Municipal Water Utilities Connection Policy related to meters.
sure you're all fascinated by this topic. From staff's perspective, a number of the recommended modifications are things we have in operation right now. They're just not necessarily clear to the customer or potential customer. So this is a mix of both memorializing requirements that are either identified in the tariff or have been in practice for some time, and to address some actual enforcement issues that we have related to either multi-tenant buildings or how meters are set up when there is subdivision of properties. So we have proposed some language to, if approved, to be incorporated into the water connection policy to ultimately define not only the meter locations, define the difference between meters and sub-meters or masters and sub-meters, and to clarify irrigation meters, which, just to be clear, is not new. We have irrigation meters. It, again, just didn't have a clause in the policy to otherwise explain. So we're looking for feedback if needed, and if not, approval of the language that would then be incorporated into an updated version of the document.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission
Meter test.
or a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second. Hearing and seeing no other comments or questions. Everyone who approves, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That item is approved. And now, on to the item I read earlier, which I'll read again. Discussion regarding an amendment to the Mequon Municipal Water Utilities Connection Policy related to cost sharing for betterment of service projects.
I will simply note that at this point, we have offered forms of cost share and or benefit to the utility absent a cost share. They've just been negotiated through the development agreements. And as we're seeing an increased number of either requests for cost share or an increased number of properties that would warrant them, some examples were provided in your packet, we thought it may be best to consider some policy language that would define the circumstances under which cost sharing would be considered, and further how that cost share would be provided, both when it is utility initiated and when it is development initiated. To be clear, we're only talking about betterment of service projects. You may all recall the water utility cannot expend utility funds on prospective development. So this isn't for, and if you build it, they will come scenario. This is truly as if the utility has identified, for example, a loop in the system that we could leverage a development to install at the time and not have the cost to the ratepayers of a standalone utility project, among other examples. On the flip side, there is the potential where the utility may consider completing a betterment of service project that has a direct impact on the adjacent property owners, and therefore consider whether the adjacent property owners should be responsible for any of that betterment of service project. Perhaps the most prime example being the Swan Ridge Farms development that was able to extend the main a good portion up Swan Road, got us that much closer to now the critical connection up Swan Road and east down Donjas Bay to Wauwatosa Road that would run immediately adjacent to all of the undeveloped central growth properties that would otherwise be required to install that water main as a building contribute, as all of the other central growth properties have had to do. And so in that case, it's a question as to whether that benefit should be assigned to those adjacent properties such that they would bear that cost at the time of connection. While that's kind of the overview, we thought it may be best to walk through a series of questions that were in the packet that could give the staff some guidance to generate said policy language, unless you tell us at the outset that you are not willing to consider one. Then we can simply move on.
It appears we have 6 questions to get through.
Yes.
Shall we take them in order?
Sure. So the first is, should the water utility consider defining a policy and terms and conditions for the cost share of betterment of service projects, or continue to negotiate on a case-by-case basis? Again, I think I've given a couple examples where it's gone in both directions to the utilities' benefit, and we have required development to complete betterment of service projects at their cost. And when we have cost shared, like we did for the upsizing of the main in the Swan Ridge Farms development. So it has gone in both directions at this point.
Well, yeah, we have a ad hoc policy now where we do it on the fly, or do we want a written one? Any feedback on that, Commissioner Parrish?
Yeah, thanks for bringing this to us, Director Lundin. I guess I'm inclined to say no formal policy. I was interested if it meant, like, if it benefited other larger projects, like eventually Uleo Creek and the Southwest Industrial. I didn't fully realize this is for kind of smaller betterment of service projects. So I thank you for that explanation. And I do think that it belongs oftentimes in the development agreement, also as a point of leverage as we're negotiating that with the developers. Whereas if we spell it out as a formula, as we have seen with our TIF policy, all of the negotiation power goes away from the city and they just get automatic checks, if you will. So I do like anything that preserves our negotiating ability. Thank you.
I will just note, and that's fine, if that's ultimately the decision, I will just note that absent a policy, then, well, I suppose we could still consider it on a project by project basis. It's just more the opposite. If we were going to do a betterment of service project, that would ultimately be the obligation of the adjacent property owner, then absent a policy, that's not really negotiated as a part of the DA because we would be initiating the project. So at that point, I guess staff would just have to come forward and request a special assessment.
So run that scenario by me
because
again.
that's not good either, so what you just said. So Because
So-
people just don't want, sometimes people just don't want to hook up. That's the issue.
And
So-
well, while we are a voluntary utility, we do have requirements. So new development does have to connect
Yes.
under the parameters of the connection policy. I shouldn't say everyone. If you're outside of the sewer service area or in some locations, then you don't have to connect. So in the locations where the betterment of service project may bring service to properties that did not otherwise have it, that at the time of development would have been responsible for that main cost or that infrastructure cost, they just got it for free. And so there is no DA because at the time they are not developing. But if our betterment of service project is first, then they would get all of the benefit without any of the cost. And then the ratepayers would be paying for that betterment of service project without the development having to
In this
contribute.
scenario, they're in the service area, but they don't have a main yet.
Yeah, so central growth is a perfect
Yeah.
example, that if the main went down Donjas Bay, all of those properties would then have the water main without any of the cost.
For new development, but if you're an
For new
existing, so that's important because you are a voluntary utility.
Well, and we still wouldn't come.
Insofar as if you were an existing home that's not on
Nope.
utility, you don't have
Correct.
to connect.
Correct.
So they wouldn't necessarily be paying, it'd be the undeveloped people when they connected.
Correct. Kind of the opposite of our refund clause.
It's
This
a,
is part of their connection costs, so.
But it's not. Absent a policy, it's not,
Well-
I guess, to clarify. So we wouldn't be able to
I think-
charge that to them.
yeah, I think what staff is proposing, if there's a scenario that seems likely to happen, because we're thinking about it, where we would extend a pipe for betterment of service reasons, but
Correct.
someone ultimately benefited by being able to connect to it.
Correct.
We lost the ability to charge them to do the build and contribute method because we blinked first and did it for betterment of service. I think that's the corner case they're asking about here specifically.
Sure. Well, then I revise my comment. I think it's a good policy. And if you're going to make them pay for it, I like the idea of us also, I know it's a question down the road where we finance it essentially and we spread it out over time.
And
So,
unlike, well, first of all, I won't pretend to speak to TIF policy, so that is not my wheelhouse. I will fully admit that. But perhaps I should clarify, I don't know that the policy language from our perspective would intend to be formulaic, but more to define the types of projects that would be eligible, the types of cost sharing that could be considered, and how that would be allocated. So I don't know that it would ever be like TIF, that if you do these things, you get this money. I don't think from our perspective that's necessarily what we're suggesting. It's just that either where perhaps a development completing a project is cost prohibitive because of some of the betterment of service costs that would be required by the utility, that the utility could either cost contribute or something to those. And then again, in the opposite case where we were just talking about, that we could, whether it's through the connection fee or through a special assessment or another manner, recoup that portion that the property owner would be obligated to at the time of connection, absent the betterment of service project.
And in the last, explanation that she gave, what we would be looking for is not the oversizing of the main, which is the betterment of service. So like if you have a water main running down the street and the development only needs 8-inch, but the utility wants 16-inch because we need that for the remainder of the utility still plans on paying the difference between the 8 and the 16, but we want to be able to assess the cost of the 8 to the future development whenever it develops.
thank you.
So basically creating a mechanism for us to claw back cost later.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, and for those that are not familiar, I reference the refund clause because when developers install main, if someone along the main connects eventually, that connection fee goes back to them because they bore the expense and the utility did not. So rather than the utility collecting the connection fee, it goes back to the developer. And so it's essentially the reverse of that we would be having that refund clause for ourselves, essentially.
In the rare instance that we're the developer.
Yes.
Okay, I think that was helpful to talk through. Commissioner Gebhardt.
Just a quick follow-up, so I understand this. I'm having a tough time following the conversation a little bit, so I'm going to try to ask a question to make sure I'm understanding it. Originally, there was some discussion in terms of being able to maintain our control in terms of negotiating power, right? Are we able to draft a policy in which we don't back ourselves into a corner in terms of certain projects as it comes to negotiations? Can we draft a policy that creates a win-win for the city?
That's certainly our intent. Our intent is to both incorporate some of the example Jim just gave about the upsizing. We now have 2 different development agreements that have some language in there, but they're only in the development agreements, and we would have to remember that they're there. And so part of that would be extracting that language into a policy so that that is one thing that is afforded to the utility. And maybe I should back up and just answer yours. From our perspective, this wouldn't be a cost share requirement. So it's not obligating the utility to cost share. It would just be defining the parameters under which cost share would be considered. So maybe that's the shortest answer about the negotiation is we would never intend to put something together that was so restrictive or so formulaic that we lose any negotiating power or anything else. It would just be trying to put together some standard language that would be utilized so that maybe there's a little less negotiation when it comes to a standard set of projects that we would be doing.
Certainly sounds reasonable. Thank you.
I muted myself. Any other comments on, we're still on item 1 here.
I was going to say, this one was just, the first one was just meant to say, do we want to consider policy language? We would come forward with language that you can actually react to. I understand that we maybe know some more scenarios. We just, if the answer was no, then we could all save our time and move on. So the intent would certainly be to come back with actual language for you all to react to and see.
I'm sensing at least a soft yes. Maybe a show of hands. Okay. On to number 2.
Yeah, oh, there we go. Yes. Should the water utility include special assessments or charges as one of the mechanisms to equitably distribute the private property portion of the shared cost? And whether Commissioner Parrish intended to or not, I actually like that he suggested it be a connection fee instead of a special assessment, because our referendum language and such is actually very restrictive in terms of how we could address charges as a utility, and a connection fee may be the magic answer. So perhaps if you don't mind, on the fly, we can talk about whether we should include connection fees as one of the mechanisms to equitably distribute the private property portion of the shared cost.
Yeah, I think so there's basically 2 mechanisms. There's a special assessment and a connection fee. Who's comfortable with the connection fee? I think majority will. Who's comfortable with the special assessment? Even, it seems like no one's going to bite for that. And it may not even be allowable in our, with the way our.
It is something
utility was
that
funded.
I've broached with the city attorney a couple of times. I will note that even if you decide no, you're certainly not precluded from considering it in the future. It's just we wouldn't necessarily generate the policy language that is the default. So to the point of negotiation, it is something you could consider in the future. We just wouldn't, it sounds like, with the lack of hands, we just wouldn't write it to be the statutory process that way.
It seems like the connection fee at the time when they connect, and maybe you could even write in language, if we do it in year 1 and they don't connect for 10 or 15 years, there might be an inflationary adjustment to keep up for costs, because we made an investment, and just getting then your dollars back is not.
And we do have, for those that may recall, the sanitary sewer special assessment that we did on Wauwatosa Road had some of those provisions in there. So we have some of that language that we could work from.
Okay, so that's something we're used to doing already anyway.
I will also chime in too. A connection fee is also probably simpler for us to utilize in our other communities, since we do also serve Thiensville, Bayside, and portions of River Hills. A special assessment, putting it on the taxes, just gets a little more complicated when we're dealing with cross municipalities. So
That's a fantastic point to bring up. Yeah. Okay, that settles number 2.
Number 3 is, if the water utility reimbursement for a betterment of service project is authorized, should the water utility require public building requirements and city financial policies are met? We bring this up because private development can generally get projects done cheaper than the city can. And so there is a potential cost benefit to the utility customer. Please note, this is not compromising any standards. We have standard specifications for land development. We have the water connection policy, all that define the quality, the standard, the type size of pipe, spacing of fire, everything you can imagine. So this is not a consideration as it would relate to the the standard under which it would be installed. It's just whether to how we would validate to our ratepayers that the cost is what we should be paying. And one of the ways to do that is certainly to make them bid the project. Alternatively would be any of a number of other ways that we could require them to substantiate the cost.
Commissioner Meyer.
Well, the advertisement process itself is, I guess, technically 3 weeks. You have to have 2 ads 2 weeks apart, and then the last ad a week before the bid opening. So technically, I guess 3 weeks. They don't have the same award process that we do. It's just they typically wouldn't bid the project. They would send it to their favorite contractors or unfavorite contractors and get pricing outside of the bidding process. That's a good point. I guess I assumed if we made a requirement for a public bid that we would require them to take the lowest cost. But I suppose if it's not ours, I'd need the city attorney to tell me if we have to, but requiring it to be bidding and then requiring us to take the lowest bid, I suppose, are two different decision points.
Not really. Typically, you would just require them to follow the bidding law, which would require the lowest responsible bidder. Doesn't necessarily mean the lowest bidder in every instance. Just like when we award a contract, it doesn't necessarily mean that. But generally, I mean, that's the point of bidding, is that you're looking to try to get the lowest cost. And so to have a policy that didn't require you to take the lowest cost would be kind of silly.
We did require Swan Ridge Farms to bid, and you may recall they actually had to bid it 2 ways because of the upsizing. They had to bid it both at the cost to only serve the development and the cost at the upsized pipe, so that we could determine the net cost to the utility of that upsizing.
And we did that all in accordance with irregular public bidding rules.
Yes, we required them to follow state statute.
I guess do we have a feel for how much we typically, are there other things invoked by the public bidding process that tend to drive more cost? Or we just assume that it costs more because it's done? I think anecdotally we believe that to be true, but do we have a pulse on how much that might be?
I don't know that
Like
we
what-
have a pulse on how much that may be.
Yeah, there's not a fixed percentage or anything like that you assume that it adds. In fact, there are instances, in fact, I've had personal experience with instances where a contractor has come in and said, here's our price. And when you say, well, that's great, but we need to bid it, and then you bid it, and the same contractor came in with a price that was about $150,000 less than the $400-some thousand that he had proposed. So sometimes bidding actually gets you a lower price than what the market otherwise might get you. But the general consensus or thought is it adds cost overall, but you know, how much or a percentage, there's not a fixed number that people rely on.
I will note, and perhaps to the city attorney's point, that while we would require bidding, we wouldn't define their requirements. So when the city bids, we obviously have insurance and bonding and warranty and other requirements, and those wouldn't necessarily be the same because it's the contractor's financial risk, not the city's. So when we're requiring the public bidding process to be followed, it's really to vet cost, to ensure that the ratepayers get the same costs, but we wouldn't otherwise be vetting the bid documents as it relates to any of that, the bonding, the warranty, or anything else, because again, we have our standards that they're required to meet regardless of how they structure their contract.
Sounds like we're better off
Okay.
bidding. I don't know, anyone have any opinions on that? Commissioner Parrish?
I was just gonna say, I think we should keep public bidding out of private development. I think it really could be unique. I don't know that I see that every municipality. I think that as long as we reserve the right to handle situations the way you did with Swan Ridge Farms, where you asked them to just go get a second private bid.
It wasn't a private, they had to
was a
bid it
public
both
bid.
ways.
That was a public bid.
Yeah, I got publicly bid, and they bid it, all bidders bid it both ways, so we could
Yes.
calculate the delta.
Yeah.
One of the P2 developments also had to do that. I'm trying to remember other examples, but we have required it before.
Yeah, but you're talking about just the bidding part, not all the other, we have all the clauses when we're doing it, the financial clawback mechanisms and such, and that's not being invoked. It's just the,
Yeah, it's just how we ultimately vet the, I don't know, fair market price of the cost of the
Yeah, I get it.
project.
But developers are going to go nuts if we go in there and start telling them they can't use their contractors. But I get that we need to make sure it's within market.
This is why we're asking the question. You know, the city's financial policies require at certain thresholds that the projects be bid. And so we're just trying to reconcile if there is a cost share, how we meet those financial policies, or that the policy would carve out the ability for us to not to. That's why we're asking the question.
let me ask another question, and it'll help
Yes.
us triangulate on this. If the project didn't involve a betterment of service, we wouldn't do this.
No.
So maybe.
And/or
maybe-
if they didn't want to seek reimbursement, if they just want to hold the whole cost and do it and contribute to us, which there have been examples of where they've done that, then they can do it however they want and build and contribute.
And the example of that is Enclave. Enclave, as they do their different expansions and they keep going on, they're bidding, you know, they're coming up with their contractor. We don't know if they bid it out. We don't know, you know, if they just have a contractor that they go to. They just have our standards. They make sure that everything is built according to our standards. And basically at the end of it, they tell us how much they paid so that we can put it into our books.
Commissioner Talaco.
When it comes to taxpayer money, I think we need to follow our policy, but give an option for them. Hey, if you don't want to bid it out, you don't want those delays, etc. All right, you're going to cover 100% of it, or I don't know, you know, I don't know exactly what the number should be, but give them an out that says, hey, if we're going to slow you down and you don't like that, there's a cost benefit, right? Put it on them and say, hey, then we're not going to do that part of it.
And they are,
Both.
and they are, and that is the way it is right now. I mean, the only mechanism at this point is build and contribute, which is 100% at their cost. So if they don't want to exercise the cost share clause, again, that's how it would operate now, absent a policy. We can, and I don't necessarily want to get hung up on any one of these points, so I think we can probably bring some language through that everyone can react to, and if it all gets struck, then understood, but we can certainly, based on this portion of the conversation, bring back some potential language for consideration.
Why don't we draft something and we can have a meatier discussion? I think we're all learning a lot about this specific
Sure.
sliver of it in the heat of the moment. And I can definitely appreciate Alderman Parrish's point of view, trying to streamline private development. And I also understand Alderwoman Talaco's point. I just would want to make sure there's a mechanism where we can, if we're relying on someone that's not part of a public bidding process to vet that delta cost that, you know, we're going to reimburse. I wouldn't want that to be taken advantage of because we're not using the public process, but I certainly understand the point about staying out of the way of.
Well, thankfully,
Private
because we
side.
have a little bit of language, I don't think that would be a large amount of our time that we can bring back for everyone to discuss further.
Okay, so
The one thing that just came to mind when you were talking, Andy, is the fear is if they don't bid it out and they just go to a contractor and have the contractor provide them with a number, remember, this is the cost of the the water main that is necessary to serve the development, which let's just say it's 8 or 10 inch, and then the water main that is oversized for betterment of service to the utility, right? Well, the contractor could say, oh, well, this 8-inch main is going to cost $100,000, and it's only going to add, I'm sorry, the cost of the project is $100,000, but the 8-inch I would have put in for like 40. So now we end up paying for like $60,000, and we have no idea how they came up with that number, or, if it's even an accurate number. Is this their buddy that's, skewing it?
I have some thought. We've done this for stormwater management things before where we either require a PE to stamp and sign a cost estimate or other things. So I think we can bring back some things for consideration because we need to stop only using upsizing as the example, because this also could just be a loop. So it's not always the net cost between the difference. It could just be installation of main. So it's not always just the net. It's just how we validate that the ratepayers are getting the best cost, which is what we do through the bidding process. So I think we can bring some different options back. And again, if you strike it all, then so be it.
We're right back where we're at.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for that. We can move on. Good discussion though, so thank you, everyone. We are on number 4. Did I lose track of that?
Which I think we've somewhat incorporated into some of these other discussions, but I will ask it just to dot I's and cross T's. Water utility staff would suggest that the calculation for the betterment of service project portion of the cost share be defined as the cost for the infrastructure upsizing required solely due to the betterment of service project. Does the Water Utility Commission agree? So in other words, we would still be requiring the developer to pay 100% of the building contribute portion. And the only thing that would be considered is the cost share to the utility for the betterment of service project. Not that there would be some other terms of cost share, that it wouldn't be based on us saying we'll pay 50% of it or some arbitrary percentage, that it would be that directly attributable to the betterment of service project.
I think that's been good policy. Any other feedback? I think we like that one. Number 5.
And maybe this is a little too open and given some of this discussion that we should bring some potential options back when we look at that. And that's how should reimbursement be structured? The Village of Thiensville, you may recall a couple years ago, did a betterment of service project where we had to go through a full intergovernmental agreement and everything. And that was structured such that we gave them full payment at the end of 5 years. Mm-hmm. We have had the structure for Swan Ridge Farms was a little bit different with some parameters based on their final plat. But I think what we're getting to is setting up some metrics such that it may be to the advantage of the utility and that not all of it is paid on invoicing, so to speak. So, but I know this is maybe pretty wide open, so I guess maybe the question should be, would you consider language related to a structured reimbursement rather than just due on invoice? And if the answer is yes, we would bring back potential forms of reimbursement. Okay.
See lots of heads nodding up and
Okay.
down. Okay. All right.
And then somewhat similarly, I think we can maybe bring some back. I think we're just trying to make the point that while we advocated for consideration of a policy, that we are obviously limited by our capital funding, and we don't want to get into a position where development is driving our capital agenda, and maybe we're getting a little bit out ahead of ourselves in terms of obligations for development instead of what the utility prioritized betterment of service projects are. So somewhat similar to the reimbursement question, we would recommend including policy language that would give us an option to basically either say no or not now. That if the funding for capital on the water utility side is such that it's not in the best interest of the ratepayers to expend the funds on that betterment of service project, that we have the right, again, to either say no or not now.
Seems prudent. All right,
And I think that was it.
that's it. That wasn't so bad. All right, we are at the end. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Don't everyone rush at once. Motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned.